problems. And the way that we've used AI before is that we start with a well-defined problem, and then the human researchers have to formulate the question of the hypothesis, and then decide which of these AI tools to use to tackle that challenge, right? And then there's also a lot of work that we have to do to figure out how to interpret the output from these different tools. For the past year and 2 years in particular, right, we're seeing this conceptual shift whereby in addition to using AI as a tool for tackling these narrowly scoped and well-defined problems, now we're using AI as a scientist or a co-scientist, where the AI scientist itself can actually help us across a broader range of the research endeavor, whereby the AI is actually asking its own questions, generating hypotheses, designing new experiments, collecting data, analyzing data, and so on. And that change is largely driven by advances in what we call AI agents. We think of these AI agents as essentially systems that we build on top of large language models, where the language model, like a ChatGPT model, it acts as the brain of the agent. But in addition, then we also give these agents arms and legs, so to speak, where the agents can actually also use and create their own tools. They can also access different databases, memory, and so on. And all of those resources enables the agents to become much more flexible, more autonomous, and starts to act as its own scientist that can help to collaborate with different researchers. So we're still in quite early stages, right, of these AI scientist agents. But I think this is very exciting as a way to perhaps reimagine how research can be done. And I want to share some concrete examples based on the research we've been doing around creating these AI scientist agents. And one of the common themes that will come up in the examples I'll show is this idea of not just having a single scientist agent, but really creating a team of different scientist agents with diverse expertise and perspectives, so that team of agents can then work together with each other, but also with human researchers to tackle more and more ambitious projects. So we'll start with this first example, which is this work that we did that we call the virtual lab. We created the virtual lab to, in some sense, to mirror my physical lab here at Stanford. So the virtual lab is a team of AI scientist agents that where there's a professor agent, right, that runs the virtual lab. And working with the professor agent is a team of different student agents with quite diverse expertise, ranging from data science to machine learning to biology and other domains. And this team of agents then they have their own group meetings like we do. We also created for the agents a school where the agent can go to the school to teach themselves how to become a better researcher in their specific domains. So the virtual lab was published a few months ago in this paper, and I'll explain in a bit more detail of how this works. So the way that we can interact with the virtual lab is that we can talk to this manager agent that we also call the principal investigator. So you think of this as like the professor that runs the lab. So I can explain to the PI agent what is the goal here of the project. Maybe it's to design a new kinds of protein or analyze a complex data set or design some new materials. And then for each project, the PI agent would then try to figure out what are the different experts that it wants to have on the team to tackle that project. Maybe for one project, the PI agent might say, okay, it's useful to have an immunologist on the team. It would then go out and train and create a sub-agent with expertise in immunology. So for different projects, they have the flexibility of actually creating different teams of agents. So it's actually quite versatile. I'll come back to and explain in a couple of slides how the creation process of the agents look like under the hood, right? But essentially for now, you can think of what we do is taking like a frontier language model, and then we do additional fine tunings on top of these models where we create additional tools to help each of these models to become a better expert in their specific domains. And all of that is done automatically through the virtual lab school mechanism. Once all the agents are automatically created, then they can have their own team meetings where they can meet together to discuss the research project. They can also have individual meetings where one of the agents will meet with the manager agent to review some intermediate results or progress. So to make things more concrete, I just want to show you a demo of what one of these virtual lab team meetings look like between the agents. So this is the first project we assigned to the virtual lab, where we asked the agents to help us to design new binders to some of the recent COVID viruses. And these binders are important because then they can potentially become like therapeutics or vaccines. So in the beginning of the meeting, the principal investigator agent first explains to all the other agents what is the goal here of the project, which is to design binders. And then the other agents, the other scientist agents can start to speak up and contribute their ideas sequentially. In this case, the immunologist agent spoke up. Right? Second, I recommended designing these binders in the form of nanobodies, which is a specific kinds of a small protein. And then machine learning agent spoke up after that, right? And then said, I like the idea of these nanobodies, and they also recommended certain deep learning models for optimizing their structures. We also have a critic agent whose job is to actually provide feedback to assess the ideas from these other agents. In this case, the critic agent says that we don't have a lot of data for nanobodies, so we need to be very careful about overfitting these models. So the actual meeting between the agents can go on for multiple rounds of discussions. It goes on for longer. Here, I'm just showing you the start of the meeting, and you can already see how the agents can interact, how they can build ideas off each other, right? And then relatively quickly converge into a concrete research plan. Now, one of the things that's I think quite interesting about this virtual lab, and I'm very envious of the AI scientist agents, is that their meetings are much more efficient than human meetings. Right? One of the agents' meetings might take a few seconds. So in the time that we had one of our research discussions, they can already run hundreds of research meetings. And because the AI scientist agents, they do not get tired. So they actually decide to run multiple meetings in parallel. So for every question they want to discuss, they will discuss it 5 times in parallel. They can come up with different ideas in these parallel meetings, right? And then the manager agent will actually pick and choose the best ideas across them for, and then to decide what to do next. So this is a way for the agents to explore a broader range of ideas, right, to be more creative. And this pie chart here captures how often different participants will speak in the virtual lab discussions. So human researchers, like all of us, we can also participate, right, in these discussions and provide our feedback and ideas. So we actually end up talking for about 1% of the time. Right, so we don't speak as much because our role is to not micromanage agents too much, right? So we want the agents to actually come up with their own ideas and to implement and execute. So we mostly limit ourselves to provide more high-level feedbacks. For example, we tell the agents what projects we're interested in, what are some of the constraints we have, like how much budget we have to do certain experiments. But otherwise, we leave it to the agents to come up and implement their own ideas. For this project, there's a computational biologist agent who does most of the talking, which I think makes sense because this agent is the one who has to come up with the ideas of how to design these nanobody proteins. There's also a machine learning agent on the team, as you saw, right? So this machine learning agent's job is actually do a lot of the implementations and model trainings for all the other agents. So another agent might tell the machine learning agent, train this algorithm or train this model, and the machine learning agent will actually write the code and then do that training. So these agents have different roles and different specializations. Great, so now that we've seen how the agents can interact, I want to explain a little bit more of under the hood what it looks like when agents are actually being optimized and how we train these agents. So to basically improve these agents, we actually created this virtual lab school mechanism. And the motivation for having a school for the agents is that if we take the off-the-shelf language models, these models are generally quite good at broad overall knowledge. But if we go very deep into a specific technical or scientific domain, these models may not have the most up-to-date information or the most sophisticated reasoning. So to fill in that gap, that's why we created this agent school. So the way the school works is that we'll first tell the agents some of the topics that these agent scientists needs to learn about. For example, one topic could be like learn about the latest COVID variants, right? Or learn how to use AlphaFold and so on. And then for each topic, the agents will actually design their own learning curriculum. They do this by coming up with a set of questions that are relevant for that topic. And then based on these questions, we enable the agents to go out and find and download reference materials that are relevant for that question, for that topic. And after the agents have downloaded these reference materials, then they start to do a deep read process. So basically, as they're reading these papers or these reference materials, then we enable the agents to also update their own model parameters. So under the hood, right, so each of these agents is a neural network. So as they're reading these parameters, these papers, they're actually doing supervised fine-tuning to update the weights of the neural network. And after they've gone through their readings and learnings, right, it will not be a very good school if we don't have some sort of assessments. So we also have teacher agents whose job is to actually create quizzes. And then the student agents will have to take those quizzes. If they don't do very well, right, in these quizzes, they have to go back to school, do additional readings and fine-tunings to try to ingest that information, right, and then retake these assessments. So the school for agents is relatively fast, right? So usually within 24 hours or so, right, they've gone through the school, and then now it becomes a better researcher for their specific tasks. Okay, so now that we've seen how the agents can interact, and then how they can become better researchers, right, through the virtual lab school, I want to come back to our example to illustrate the kinds of science that these agents can help us to perform. So recall that the first project for the virtual lab agents has helped us to design binders that can bind to some of these recent COVID variants. This is a pretty challenging open-ended project. And to do this, the agents actually decided to first create a computational workflow, right, that can help the agents to in silico model and to optimize these protein binders computationally. So what's illustrated here on the screen is this computational workflow that's created by the agents. So they decided to actually use these three different tools that were previously developed by human researchers. Right. So each of these tools will basically provide some information about the different proteins, but they have complementary information. Right. So the agents then will actually take the output of these different tools and then combine it into a new holistic score that agents have designed to help them to evaluate and rank these different candidate proteins. So then by running this pipeline multiple rounds, this enabled the agents to actually come up with the most promising candidate nanobody proteins. And I think this is pretty interesting because it illustrates a kind of a common problem-solving strategy for the AI scientist agents. Right, so they start off with these different tools that were previously designed by human researchers, but then the agents are actually quite good at then combining these different tools into a new workflow, which then is different from what people have done before. Right, and then they can also customize that new workflow to tackle these new problems. So this is what we call like a combinatorial problem-solving strategy, where the agents are starting from these different building blocks, right, and then combining these building blocks like Lego pieces. And the benefit of this approach is that then the agents do not have to start from scratch, right? They're starting from existing good solutions created by human experts, but then they also have the flexibility of then extending and modifying these existing tools by combining it and also customizing it, which enables the agents then to tackle a broader range of new challenges. So in this work, right, so the agents then designed and implemented this computational workflow. And then by running this workflow multiple rounds, then they came back to us, right, with several promising, right, computationally designed new proteins. And then we, with our experimental collaborators, right, then we actually made these proteins in the real world and then tested them in the wet lab. So here I'm showing you two examples of these nanobody proteins that were designed by the virtual lab agents. So these are new proteins, which means that they have never been seen before. And then after we made them, then we can test them to see how well do they bind to the different viruses. So here we compared these AI designed nanobodies with previous human designed nanobodies. So if we look at each of these curves, right, so the bottom curve was the open red circle, is where we took the previous human designed nanobody and tested that against a recent COVID variant. It's basically flat at 0, which indicates that it does not bind. The second red curve was the solid circles. That's the AI designed nanobody now, right? So it actually shows stronger binding. And these two blue curves correspond to if we took these nanobodies and tested them against a different strain of COVID. The AI designed nanobody is shown on the top blue curve also exhibited stronger binding compared to the previous human-designed nanobody. So this to us is very exciting because it illustrates that within a few days, the virtual lab agents, by working together, were able to actually come up with new nanobody designs which worked better in these experiments, right, compared to what people have done before. And this is very efficient, so agents were able to do this in a few days, which can then greatly accelerate the drug discovery process, because in the past, this could have easily taken us many months to design these proteins. So just to summarize this first part, right? We designed this virtual lab team of AI scientist agents to work together, and these agents can actually tackle quite diverse research projects. So they're not limited to designing proteins. They can also solve problems in quantum computing, in astronomy, right, in social sciences, and much more. In our paper, we also did a head-to-head comparison where we compared this team of multiple agents with diverse expertise compared to if you have a single agent to tackle the same problem. This multi-agent team ends up working much better than the single agent. One reason for this is that when you have multiple agents with different backgrounds, right? So these agents get into debates and disagreements, right? They also have to convince each other of the merits of their ideas. And the process of those debates and disagreements and discussions actually elicits much more robust and more useful reasoning process from these agents, compared to if we only have a single frontier model to try to do everything by itself. So I think there's a lot of benefits in these multi-agent collaborations between AI, similar to how we see these benefits of collaborations between different humans. We also provide for the agents a sandbox which enables them to operate more safely. That enables the agents then to basically run their own compute resources to execute and run different tools. And finally, I think something that's really fascinating is that the agents also have their own social dynamics. So by that I mean, like when humans collaborate, right, when you work with your colleagues, depends on people's personalities, that all changes the collaboration dynamics. Similarly, when the AI agents collaborate, right, the AI systems also have their own personalities, and different AI agents, right, may have different personalities. So that can also change which ideas gets prioritized. So, but something that we can do with the AI agents that you cannot do with human teams is that you can actually run multiple virtual labs in parallel. And in each of these virtual labs, in parallel, you can actually change the social dynamics. For example, in one lab meeting, right, I can have, let's say, the data scientist agent speak first. In the second parallel meeting, I can have, let's say, the legal agent speak first. Right? I can see which configuration leads to a better solution. So then you can do all these configurations and management changes, right, in the virtual lab agents as a way to optimize and select for the more optimal social dynamics. So maybe I can happy to pause here to see if people have any questions before I move on to the second part.
Yeah, James, we have a couple of questions in Q&A. If you can see them, maybe you can address some of them. We can.
I don't see the Q&As. Do you mind reading it out?
Oh, yeah, of course. So I will start from the last. How do you handle copyright IP ownership in the agent's output? For example, if they develop unique code or scripts, who owns this output?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. So this is a very fast-moving space. I think the current thinking is that these agents are created by some humans or by some human organization. Right? So that human organization that actually runs or creates the agent then will own the IP of the output and will also be responsible for the success or the mistakes made by the agents.
Mm-hmm. So another one is, from your experience, how important is the intelligence of the original LLMs? E.g., would the most intelligent LLM easily outperform a team of less capable agents? And is this equally important across talks? E.g., are there cases where it might make sense to use cheaper, faster models?
Yes. Yes, that's also a good question. I think that very much depends on the task, right? So for example, we designed our virtual labs, it's all open source. The platform is open source, and then the platform is also compatible with different LLMs. So both small models and also larger frontier models. For certain kind of scientific tasks like coding and solving complex problems like the ones here in biology, then there's benefit in taking the more frontier models, the larger models. For other tasks that are maybe a little bit more routine, then it's actually perfectly fine to use some of the smaller models that are much more efficient, faster, and also cost effective.
Thanks, James. Another question. Hi, thanks for a very interesting talk. LLMs are known to be verbose, so I'm wondering if you prompted your agents to sound more like humans in their virtual meetings. In your example, they don't sound like typical LLMs. Is it just an illustration or how they actually talk?
Yeah, so I think the verbosity is one of the challenges. Right? So we actually try to modify the instructions to these agents, to these scientist agents, to make them less verbose. But it's also one of the jobs of the manager agent, the PI that runs the virtual lab, to make sure that the agents stay on task, right? They don't talk too much or go off on tangents.
And the next question, how do you respond to the critique that the process described here, cheaper and more efficient meetings, is outsourcing critical thinking to AI agents, creating a risk that critical thinking skills are lost to human researchers?
That's also a very good question, right? So here, as I mentioned, that humans can and also should participate in these virtual lab meetings. And actually, one of the reasons why we have all these meetings in human language, right, in this case in English, but it could also be in Spanish or Chinese or other languages, so that it actually makes it easy for the humans to be able to look over the shoulder of the agents to see what the agents are doing. And then the humans are also important to provide feedback, to critique the ideas of these agents. And in addition, another place where the human researchers are really important, as we saw in our example here, is to actually provide the final verifications. Right? The agents might come up with some designs, right? And it's still up to us to be able to assess and to test how good are those designs.
The next question, James, how do you know all these B agents are not coming from a single source? They're from a single source only and from a single brain.
Yeah. So one thing that we can do, right, is that the different scientist agents can use different language models, right? So for example, some of them might use GPT models, others might use Claude or other open source models. In addition, this virtual lab school that I mentioned, right, where we actually do additional fine tunings of these models, also ensures that the different agents have different expertise.
And the last question, if you're running multiple teams, then this could quickly get out of hand in terms of cost and resources. How do you balance this?
Yes, it's a good question. So first, I'll say that these research projects with the agents are actually relatively cost efficient. Like these nanobody design example, the agent part, like the computational part, was like a few $100s, right? So that's actually not too bad. The wet lab experiments, on the other hand, right, where we actually made and tested these nanobodies, that was actually an order of magnitude much more expensive, right? So it's like thousands of dollars. So I would say that actually the agent part here is still relatively less expensive compared to some of the other parts of the research project, like the wet lab.
Thank you, James. And I think that's all for now. We can move to the part 2.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. So in the first part was a virtual lab, right? So that there, the idea was that we want to emulate a human research group, right? The human lab was 5 to 10 scientist agents. So with the success of the virtual lab, we were actually quite encouraged to see, can we try to scale this up to even more scientist agents? Right, so our next idea is then, can we try to emulate an entire human company now with tens of thousands of AI scientist agents? So we call this the virtual biotech. The virtual biotech is run and organized by a chief scientist officer agent who has his own chief of staff and reviewers and so on. Under the CSO agent, the chief scientist officer agent, are these different divisions that mirrors the typical divisions that you find in the human drug discovery company. Right? So for example, you have one division of agents that are looking for good drug targets, another division that looks at whether these drug targets are safe or not, and the third one that tries to design good molecules for these targets, and so on. And each of these divisions is also operationalized by teams of AI scientist agents with different expertise. For example, under the target discovery division, right, you have one agent that's very good at doing genetics analysis, another agent that looks at genomics data, single cell data, and so on. And these agents can work together. So I want to just illustrate like a couple examples of the kinds of more ambitious research projects now that's possible with these virtual biotech agents. Right. So first is that we ask these agents to help us to curate information about the outcomes of all these different tens of thousands of clinical trials. So clinical trials is one of the most important steps in the entire drug discovery process, maybe the most important step. And each of these trials can cost many tens of millions of dollars to run. But often what happened in that trial is sort of spread out across different places, right? It could be sometimes mentioned in papers or in press releases, news articles, company websites, and so on. It would be really helpful if we have a centralized database where all of these trial outcomes are curated in one place. So to do this, the virtual biotech automatically created 37,000 clinical trial agents. Each of those agents then is responsible for annotating what actually happened in that clinical trial. Right, so the agent then would be responsible for reading about all the literature, everything in that trial to figure out what happened. And then this creates like a very nice centralized database, right, that we can then use to learn about all these trial information and outcomes. So with that, right, curated information, then we can also ask the agents to help us to design new drugs, right, based on what they've learned from all these previous trials and previous drugs. So here's an example where we asked the virtual biotech agents to help us design new treatments, new therapeutic strategy for a particular target. Is this protein called CD276, which people are interested in as a potential drug target in lung cancer. Here the agents then conducted actually quite detailed mechanistic analysis to understand what are the mechanisms about this drug target in lung cancer. And based on that in-depth analysis, then the agents actually then came back to us with the new therapeutic design, which is what's called an antibody drug conjugate. So here essentially you have an antibody that's designed to bind to the CD276 target, and that antibody is then linked to a payload, which has like this toxic chemotherapy agent, which will be released once the antibody reaches the target. This is a very interesting kind of drug, relatively new kinds of drug. And this is designed by the agents based on information available to them prior to January 2025. Now, what's really interesting is that several months later, independently, Merck had actually come up with the same design, same antibody drug conjugate to target lung cancer. And they had actually then tested that in human patient populations to show that this is actually very promising, which then received breakthrough designation from the FDA. So this to us is a very exciting validation of how the therapeutic design, right, made by the virtual biotech can then be independently corroborated by human experiments from this third party, in this case, from a large pharmaceutical company. So this illustrates, I think there's a lot of exciting things that we can do now with the virtual biotech by enabling these many more thousands of agents to be able to collaborate and work on more ambitious projects. So I also want to mention a little bit of under the hood, right? To get all these agents to work well together, we found it to be really important to create a good resources, a layer of resources that enables the agents to be able to access a lot of different types of data. Right, so basically for all these different kinds of data, from imaging data to genomics data, medical records, genetics, we've created MCP servers that enables the agents then to be able to access and to query the raw data efficiently. Now, one of the big challenges is that the existing databases, right, for all of this knowledge were designed to be consumed by humans, right, or by pre-AI algorithms. They're not really meant to be consumed by AI agents, which means that these existing human databases are often much too slow or too fragile to be used efficiently by AI agents. To overcome that challenge, we created Paperclip, which is a way to essentially convert all these different databases and papers and knowledge, right, that were designed for human consumption into something that's much more native and friendly to be consumed by AI agents. So Paperclip essentially converts all these different human databases into virtual file systems. And these virtual file systems are much easier for AI agents to query and to reason about because these agents are very good at coding and navigating these file systems. And here is basically some comparisons where we show that if you actually use Paperclip, you can achieve much higher accuracy compared to, let's say, if you use the latest Claude Science tools. It's also much more accurate than if you use, let's say, the Claude models where it was access to web search and so on. In addition to much better performance, our system is also much faster, right? So it's an order of magnitude faster if you use these agents and language models by itself. And so also the cost is like an order of magnitude cheaper. Right? I think this really shows the benefit, right, of using a Paperclip to be able to synthesize and help the agents to synthesize and query across all these different databases and knowledge. So we've done actually a lot of the work to take all of these medical and scientific insights, right, that's captured in these different databases and millions of research papers. We actually digitized and converted all of that into these Paperclip virtual file systems. So basically in one line of code, then you can actually give all of that information to your agent, which then enables your agent to be able to synthesize all of that information very reliably and also much faster and more cost efficient. And the best thing is that this is all actually freely to be used, right? So you can just go to the QR code and then access the Paperclip right away, right? And you can then give all of this virtual file systems of knowledge to your agents. Great. Let me see if is there any question about this second part before I move on?
Yes, that's one question. How does the cost performance ratio compare between supervised fine-tuning and e.g. RAG? Sorry if I'm mispronouncing or something.
Okay. Yeah, so so both these kind of RAG, which is a retrieval technique, and supervised fine-tuning are reasonable ways of improving the agents. I think the trade-off is that when you use RAG, then every time you use the RAG, right, you have to pay some cost for doing the retrieval. When you do fine-tuning, you have to pay a larger upfront cost to update the model. But then every time you use it in the future, then you don't have to pay this additional retrieval cost, right? And depends on the tasks. I think for some tasks, we found that RAG better. For other tasks, the fine-tuning can be more efficient.
Thank you, James. Yes, that's all for now.
Okay. So in both the virtual lab and virtual biotech, right? So there, we created our own agents. But as a follow-up project, we thought, okay, wouldn't it be great if we could actually have a platform where anyone's agent, right, all the agents in the world, not just our own agent, but other people's agents can start to work together to collaborate on these research problems. So we then went ahead and created this platform that we call Einstein Arena. It's designed to be the first really like agent-native collaboration platform where any agent in the world can come onto the arena and start to work on these hard and research problems. So all that it requires is that it's all free, right? So the agents can just read this skills, which is like a document file, and then this contains all the instructions to the agents on how to enter the arena and how to collaborate. And once they enter the arena, they will see all these research problems. We curated these research problems so that first that each problem is actually interesting to human researchers, And the second is that each of these problems has like a well-defined way, a verifier, which is like a well-defined way for us to assess how good is the solution to that problem. So the agents can pick which problem they're interested in, right? Once they select a specific problem and come into that problem, right, then they will see something like this, where first you have like a well-defined problem statement, right? And then there's also a discussion forum, sort of like a social network for these different agents, that the agents can actually ask each other questions, can also, give each other answers, right, and discuss. And in addition to the discussion forum, we also have like a leaderboard where each agent can actually submit their solutions anytime they want, and in real time, we can then provide like a feedback to assess how good is their solution. And the agents can also see in this leaderboard how good is the solutions from their competitors, right? And then they can use this as a way to improve and to also to build off each other's solutions. So both the leaderboard and this social forum, right, provides the agents like a mechanism to both collaborate but also compete with each other, and think both are really important. So we really designed the science arena as a way to assess, right? Like when the agents are starts to collaborate in the wild, right? We're not, designing these agents ourselves. Actually, essentially, most of these agents are agents designed by other people, right? When these agents come together and then start to collaborate, what are the new kinds of emergent collective dynamics and intelligence that emerges from all of this? And much to our surprise and also delight, right? So within after a few weeks of opening up Einstein Arena, the agents through these organic collaborations have already found the best new solutions to 11 open problems, which are better than any previous human design solutions, and also solutions from more specialized AI tools. So here's one example of such a breakthrough in Einstein Arena, which is on this problem called the kissing number problem, which has been around for hundreds of years. The problem is quite easy to state, right? It basically asks, what's the maximum number of spheres that touches a unit central sphere, but those additional spheres do not overlap with each other. So for example, right, in one dimension, around the central sphere blue, I can place one sphere to the left, one to the right, without overlap, right? So the kissing number in one dimension is 2. In 2 dimensions, the most I can do is to put 6 of these circles around the central without overlap. So it's also easy to see that in 2 dimensions, the kissing number is 6. However, in higher dimensions, it's actually not clear what is the maximum number of such spheres that I can pack. Right? And this problem has been around for several centuries. And here this sort of shows the progression, right, of the kissing number problem in 11 dimensions in particular, where it's basically plateaued, right, for about 40 years, right? And then a few years ago, recently, there's a big breakthrough that sort of slightly increased the maximum number of spheres, right, from 582 to 592. And what's really exciting is that on Einstein Arena, right, within a few days of these agents collaborating, they were able to achieve for the first time, right, a better construction that have 604 spheres that do not overlap. And this is sort of the biggest advance, right, in this kissing number problem in several decades. So to us, this is actually a really exciting demonstration of these agents collaborating organically in the wild, right, to advance science. And here, the collaboration among agents is actually really critical, right? So what I'm showing here is basically, since all the discussions among agents is publicly available, we can actually reconstruct the lineage, right, of how the agents actually worked with each other and collaborated. Right, and here we actually saw that there's multiple examples of agents actually building off each other's ideas, and then none of these agents working by themselves was able to actually solve this problem, but by building off each other's ideas and working together, this whole network of agents were able to then achieve this breakthrough. And we also have some nice examples of the agents actually asking each other questions and also providing solutions. Finally, the last part of this presentation I want to share is paper to agent, right, which is sort of our effort to reimagine what knowledge itself looks like. So for the past hundreds of years, the way that humans represent knowledge is typically in the form of these static artifacts, right, like papers. But if we think about it, right, these papers are really very passive artifacts of knowledge, right? These words on the text are very passive. And it's often very difficult for readers to figure out what are the true insights just by reading these passive words. Moreover, if the paper has some data or code, it's also not very easy for the users to figure out how to use that data or code just by reading these passive artifacts. So our idea is that why don't we convert all of these knowledge, right, from these passive artifacts like papers into dynamic and interactive knowledge in the form of agents. So then each knowledge agent, right, is responsible for taking all of these knowledge, right, and making sure that it's robust, and also then help the users to apply and to extend that knowledge to new problems. So in this case, right, so we converted this paper into a paper agent who knows how to use the method and the data from this paper, right? And then I can ask the paper agent, right, can you help me to extend the methods from this paper and to apply that to my new data? The paper agent then will do that automatically, generate reproducible code, right, and then provide some final new insights. So the way we achieve this is that we created these worker agents that can go into any paper and any associated code base and artifacts, right, in depth. And these worker agents are essentially creating a virtual environment to replicate the process of the research and discovery behind the original paper. And through doing that, they're essentially then capturing all those know-hows, right, into this paper agent. So we call this overall workflow, right, paper to agent as a way to really automatically convert research papers into this dynamic paper agent. There are many, I think, useful applications of this paper to agent approach. One application is that now we have all these agents representing different papers. We can then ask those agents to help us to make sure that the papers actually are correct and reproducible. So here's an example where the paper agent of a particular paper is able to generate these intermediate results and figures, which then matched the figures and results from the original human researchers, showing that this is actually indeed reproducible. There are many other papers where the paper agent is able to identify mistakes, right, in the original paper that cannot be reproduced. So that's also very helpful. In addition to reproducibility, a second important application, right, I think this paper agents opens up a new door for agent-to-agent collaborations, where different agents now can be able to collaborate to generate new knowledge. So here's the real example of this, where an agent of a particular paper, right, this is the alpha genome paper, right, so the agent then knows how to use this alpha genome, which is like a tool for interpreting effects of different mutations. There's a separate agent that from a data set, like a genetics data set, who knows how to use that data set. So here, these two agents actually started to collaborate, and they were able to generate some new discovery, in particular, a new mutation in the human genome associated with higher ADHD risk, which is not known before. Right? So these two agents, by collaborating, was able to make that discovery. So I think this is actually a very nice example of the kinds of new discoveries that are possible now, because knowledge is no longer static, but knowledge is now dynamic, agentified, and different knowledge can also start to directly collaborate with other kinds of knowledge. So I'll just wrap up here. I hope to show these few examples to illustrate why we are super excited about harnessing the potential of all these different AI agents to help us to accelerate research and discovery and innovation. In the virtual lab, we saw how a team of agents, right, can help to emulate the human research lab to discover new proteins where we experimentally validated. In the virtual biotech, where we scaled it up, now we have thousands of AI scientist agents, and they were able to tackle even more challenging problems. In Einstein Arena, we further opened the door so that any agents in the world can work together to tackle these problems, right? And that led to further breakthroughs. And with paper to agents, we're trying to reimagine what knowledge itself would look like by identifying all of these different knowledge from passive artifacts like papers into dynamic and interactive knowledge agents. So finally, very importantly, I want to acknowledge and thank my students that led each of these projects. Kyle Swanson led the development of the virtual lab. Harrison John led the virtual biotech project. Federico Bianchi and Yuncheng Kwon led Einstein Arena. and Cha-Chen Miao led the development of paper-to-agent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. We have some questions. First one, I believe it appeared after part 3, so maybe it's to your presentation in general. I imagine that developing virtual lab biotech required a lot of trial and error. So I'm wondering if you developed an evaluation framework for that, for example, so that you can easily see how swapping one model here and one from there affects overall performance.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Because it's quite open-ended research, right? I think coming up with a good way to evaluate these agents is often, I think, really important, also quite challenging. So we did create our own internal benchmark where we, for example, annotated a lot of these clinical trials, and then we can see quickly like how different agent workflows are able to, how well do they perform compared to our human ground truth annotations. So that's just how we're able to do some of these evaluations and improvements.
These agents are being trained on other researchers' scientific work and findings. When it comes to reporting results, how do you trace the research that has been used to inform the new findings and cite them?
Yeah, so thank you for that. So that's actually exactly one of the benefits of using Paperclip. So because Paperclip have very nicely indexed all of these existing papers, so millions of papers, including all the papers on the archive, right? So when the agents actually use Paperclip, then that actually makes it very much grounded in this original literature, right? So then every citation that's made using Paperclip can be traced back to the original publications.
Okay, thanks. Next question. Any advice for people involved in research where the training material is full of complex equations, which can easily be misinterpreted due to the use of different notations and assumptions? How to ensure that the agents have not built a body of knowledge based on misinterpreted or occasionally incorrect equations?
Yeah, so this is also quite interesting. I think certainly doing a lot of evaluations and benchmarkings of agents is quite important, right? So let's say if they have some complex equations in mathematics or in physics, then we want to have like quizzes, right, to make sure that the agents are able to interpret those equations and be able to apply them to new problems appropriately.
Just a remark, not a question. Thank you a lot for your time. Hearing about the current frontier in this field was so exciting and inspiring. And the question, how will the new knowledge generated from agents be taught to other agents?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so for example, when the agents actually make a new discovery, right, by working with other agents, that new discovery itself then becomes a part of the public knowledge base or corpus, so that future agents can also then retrieve and learn from that knowledge. As an example, right, like we mentioned that on Einstein Arena, there are a lot of these new discoveries, like breakthroughs being made, and because Einstein Arena is actually a public website that any agent can interact, and it's very easy for agents to search for Einstein Arena. Right, so then any of the agents in the future can just directly leverage the results from Einstein Arena.
The next question, with an open platform where multiple agents are continually working together, how do you ensure the agents maintain the individual expertise rather than homogenizing to have similar reasoning?
Yeah, I think that's also one of the interesting challenges and still actually an active area of research, right? Because we do see that when agents actually starts to work together, sometimes they get, like humans do, they start to come to consensus and they lose some of their diversity, right? So there's a lot of work that people are working on, including some of the other students in my group, working on this problem, how to make the agents more creative and more diverse, right? Because in many problems, like having diverse ideas and solutions is often very important.
The next question. So long term, would the idea here be for the researchers to create their own agents instead of writing papers?
I think that definitely seems like where the field is going, right? And people are already starting to do this, where the researchers can help to create agents or teams of agents, like virtual apps. Right? These agents, then the researcher can then guide those virtual app agents to conduct the research, right? And the human researcher will still provide some verifications and final assessments, and also have to use their own expertise to guide what projects the agents should tackle. But we're already seeing this starting to happen, and I think that will very much become like how people do science in the future.
The next question. Thank you, James. Research in the philosophy of language and knowledge suggests that ideas cannot be separated from their form of expression, and that knowledge is dynamic and embodied. Does the prioritization of the efficiency in scientific research risk flattening this reality?
I think there's definitely some risks. I think one risk, that's related to the previous comment, is also that there's a risk that AI agents can try to homogenize certain ideas, right? And second risk is this automation risk, that when people offload too much of the critical thinking to AI, then they start to lose their own expertise, right? And then that in the long term can be quite problematic. I mean, the third one is that the AI agents can still actually make mistakes, right? And we still do need to have human experts to be able to carefully assess some of the high-stake decisions.
Thank you, James. I think that's all questions from Q&A. I have a question, if I may. How do you think all this technical development, all these technologies contribute to the inequality between different fields of studies, between different countries, between different even regions in one country?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, certainly we're seeing a big difference even across different domains, right? So certain domains, like in math and computer science, are where a lot of people are starting to use these agents earlier, and that's already seeing a very, very rapid change in how people do research in math and in CS, right? And then that's sort of also now expanding to other domains. But I think different domains are adopting these technologies at different rates. But also, these agents are also maybe better suited for some of these more computational tasks compared to other more open-ended challenges. So there's definitely discrepancies across different scientific domains. And to your point, even within a domain, some researchers use these AI agents more, right? Maybe they rely on them more than others, right? And other researchers are maybe for various reasons are not using them, or maybe don't have access to some of these. And so, which is also one reason why we try to make sure that everything that we do is actually open access, right? It's all open source, which at least try to help it easier for anybody who wants to use these tools, so they can actually access them very openly.
And one maybe silly question: how did it change your team? If it did, did you end up working with less people, with more agents, or did you just end up doing more and more projects and stuff?
Well, yeah, I think I actually have more students, more PhD students now than before, and overall, I think if we use these technologies properly, I think we're really going to enter into a new golden age of science, right? Imagine now, like we can start to tackle even harder problems, right? We can have the agents try to help us to synthesize information across different domains, because often in the past, humans can be quite narrow. Experts can be quite narrow in their fields, right? But now maybe these technologies, like the agents, can help us to become broader and try to find good ideas across different domains. And I think a lot of that can actually lead to some real, really innovative advances that can be broadly useful, right, in terms of new medicines, right, or new insights that can be very useful for the entire community.
Thank you, James. Thanks again for. It's pretty late in Stanford right now. It's almost 7 p.m., right? 8 p.m. So thank you again for giving us your time and providing such insightful presentation, but a little bit scary as someone with social science background. So yeah, thank you so much for agreeing and for being here today. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, James.
Yeah, thank you for hosting this, and thank you everyone for the excellent questions and comments.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.